After almost 2 years since Chapter 2, Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 has finally been released to the public by Mob Entertainment. This game has been one of the most anticipated indie horror games of all time, and the marketing for it has been pretty fantastic. The obvious tonal change in the series has been piquing people's interest for months, and the sheer quality of the teasers has been truly mind-blowing. With the whole game out and fully playable, was it worth the wait? Absolutely it was, no doubt in my mind. Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is a landmark in indie horror and will likely change the scene and the genre for years to come. The effort put in to make this a legit horror experience is honestly enough to completely undo the negative influence that its franchise has had in the past. This is such an impressive game that deserves all the praise it has received and more, so without further ado, let's get into my review of Poppy Playtime Chapter 3. What I was most looking forward to was seeing how this brand new chapter would handle horror, because it has been apparent for a long time that Mob wanted this to be a more mature approach to the genre than the typical Poppy Playtime fan would be used to. And this game did not disappoint in the slightest, so that is what I'd like to talk about first. Basically what I'm saying is, I would like to explain how Poppy Playtime scares us. I enjoyed the first 2 chapters of Poppy Playtime, but aside from Chapter 1's chase, there really wasn't anything I could give much credit for being scary. The horror in these games is far from the worst I have seen, but its few attempts at horror generally fall flat, and there weren't even many attempts to begin with. Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is a complete tonal change, and it is so much better for it. The jump scares in this game are actually very sparse and do not make up most of what makes the game scary, which is pretty different from most mascot horror games. Most of this game's horror is built up from the atmosphere, the incredible environmental work, the use of sound design, the use of dialogue, and just a wide variety of high quality and creative work. The absolute best sequence in this game, as far as horror goes, is the one in Home Sweet Home, where Catnap's gas causes you to hallucinate, and you go into this weirdly PT-esque section. Gameplay-wise, it also somewhat reminds me of Vanish, a personal favorite classic of mine. You wander the halls of this abandoned, decrepit orphanage, but the environment changes around you, creating new paths at different points, and psyching you out with weird and minor scares. There's also a series of radios that tells you the story of how a dead child's remains were found at the property of Elliot Ludwig after his passing. This is the best horror sequence in any mascot horror game, and I'd make the argument it's the second best in any indie horror game. I'd only put it behind the Sayori scare from Doki Doki Literature Club. The atmosphere is truly chilling, the story elements and voice acting is fantastic, the use of Catnap lurking in the shadows is such a step up from the similar tactics used with Huggy in Chapter 1. And it's so cool the way the environment changes around you to take you out of it and confuse you. I'm a big fan of stuff like that. This sequence also ends with the Nightmare Huggy Wuggy section, and fuck you, this design is perfectly fine. A lot of mascot horror designs are goofy and borderline shitty on paper, but when you see them in execution, it completely elevates them. This is such a prime example of that. Is this thing scary when I look at it? No, not even a little bit, but the execution of this scene is insane. This scene where the game forces you to keep your camera on Huggy until he comes out of the screen to chase you is so ridiculously high quality and well executed. This is probably the best visual in this entire franchise. The effect is so impressive, and it's such a terrifying surprise. Catnap is also simply a top-tier horror monster design, mascot or otherwise, as far as I'm concerned. I think their basic design as a kid's character is adorable, their monster form is really cool, and their disgusting, freakish, animalistic final form is so disgusting and looks great during the conclusion of the game. Their very concept is intriguing and used nicely, and the whole story they give it with the tape at the start is perfectly engaging. I do think Poppy Playtime has generally had good character work as far as designs go, but as far as implementing them into the actual story goes, I think Catnap is the best they've ever done. However, my personal new favorite character from Chapter 3 would probably go to Miss Delight. This character's design and concept, although maybe less creative than something like Catnap, is just really cool and interesting to me. And her sequence is one of, if not my favorite. Though I will say, I have to complain first. They did nerf this part at launch, and that makes me so mad. When I played the game early, I got the game in advance, thank you Mob Entertainment, Miss Delight would chase you even if you were looking at her. She would merely slow down and pause slightly. Now she fully stops when you look at her like any other weeping angel would. This was just such an unnecessary nerf because Mob knows that all the partners beat this before launch. This game benefits from being more challenging. I genuinely hate this nerf a lot, but it's still a great sequence. The puzzles are all great, and the chase is arguably the best chase in the series because it's so much more than just running away. You need to use the green hand to solve energy puzzles while running away from Miss Delight while also keeping an eye on her to stop her from moving too quickly. It's thrilling, it's fun, I adore it. And also, before we get too far into the game, can we just talk about this tape for a second, the Smiling Critters VHS tape? I never had the opportunity to discuss this tape in a video, but holy hell is it peak. The animation work here is impeccable. This truly looks like an old Saturday morning kids cartoon. It's crazy how well they pulled that off. The voice acting and general sound design is phenomenal, the pacing is perfect, and enhances each element of horror that makes this tape a legitimate work of art. And this tape, this ridiculously good tape that clearly had so much effort put into it, is simply an introduction to this chapter. That is how goddamn high quality this game is. The last part of Chapter 3 I want to talk about before we move on from the horror subject is my favorite common household pet with only half of their body remaining, Dog Day. Dog Day's little moment of becoming a bunch of smiling critters puppet is so ridiculously grotesque and off-putting, and it's so goddamn cool. The chase following it is also pretty good. It has enough twists and turns, a lot like the Huggy chase in Chapter 1, to be pretty fun and interesting. I just love how disgusting this scene is. It's so goddamn gross, and I'm obsessed with that. So, to sum all that up, Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is a genuinely very impressive horror game. Again, I like Chapter 1 and 2 enough because I find them fun, but I would never say they are good horror games. But Chapter 3 is simply a fantastic horror game. It's not just fun, it's not just scary by mascot or indie horror standards, it is legitimately a great horror experience. However, it is also fun, so let's talk about something different. The gameplay and sequences in this game are definitely a lot different from Chapter 2, but that is to say, they made it better. I appreciate Chapter 2 for being fairly fast-paced and consistent, but this game actually slows down and clearly had more thought and care put into each section. The puzzles in this game are such an improvement from the previous chapters, and I'm so happy to say that I really like them. I've always been pretty indifferent to the puzzles in Poppy Playtime. I'm referring to the ones with the power nipples and the poles. I thought they were decent and totally acceptable, but they have really leveled up in this chapter, as they are significantly more intricate and complicated and creative. Poppy Playtime has always been kind of simple in its gameplay, by design, but this time around you do actually have to put a decent amount of thoughts into completing some of these puzzles. Once you figure them out for the first time, you'll never really have to think again, but the first time around, you actually have to put a lot of thought into some of these. And of course, one of the highest selling points in this game is that we get a total of 3 different hands that do different things, alongside a gas mask. This is easily the most variety we've ever seen as far as mechanics in this franchise go. The green hand is carried over from Chapter 2 and serves the same purpose of holding onto and transporting energy, the purple hand is used to jump really high when applicable, and the orange hand is a fucking gun! This game is amazing! And something I want to give the game a lot of credit for, aside from the mere existence of the 3 different hands, is that each of them get their chance to shine, and one isn't obviously prioritized over the other. The green hand is used significantly better than it was in Chapter 2, and is the focus of some of my favorite parts of the game. The purple hand is used plenty of times, and it always makes navigating an area more exciting. And the orange hand is given an entire sequence, and it's also very helpful for lighting up dark environments. The hands are all used a pretty equal amount, and they are consistently exciting and fun to use. And of course, at the end of the game, you do still have your purple and orange hand, so they will be coming back in Chapter 4. Speaking of the end of the game, the final boss is actually a pretty prime example of the hands being used, in my opinion. I've seen people have mixed feelings on this final sequence, but if I'm being honest, I don't really know why. Here's what I will say about it. I think it's poorly explained. I think having a screen explain it to you is lame, and I think the way it is explained is bad. And it's especially not explained at the end that you need to hit right-click to fire your hand. However, with enough trial and error, you'll figure out how to play, and if you fuck up too many times, I'm going to say that's a certified skill issue. I will say, if your RNG is bad, there's actually a good chance of the boss fight being boring, because if Catnap doesn't show up enough, then you are essentially doing nothing hoping something will happen, which is kinda cringe. However, I ultimately find this fight really fun once you get the hang of it. I think the tension that builds up as the time passes and Catnap gets increasingly more aggressive is honestly pretty scary. It's really fun despite its flaws. I definitely don't think this sequence is significantly worse than the rest of the game. I just appreciate that the game forces you to have a pretty fast reaction time to some of these things, and I appreciate that it forces you to pay close attention. So the puzzles are the best of the franchise by a significant margin. The use of the different hands and abilities is really fun and exciting, and pretty much every sequence in this game is perfectly crafted. And on top of how fun it is, the game is genuinely really scary. And to add to all of that, to add more to this already fun and scary game, this is easily the most intriguing the Poppy Playtime story has ever been to me. This game's tapes are quite a bit better than the tapes in the previous chapters. They're just generally written much better. The dialogue in these tapes tell us the perfect amount about the characters in them, and they reveal just the right amount of details regarding the overall story. And all the voice actors in this game just do an outstanding job. They always have, but I just always want to give them credit for that as well. All of them do an amazing job in their respective performances. I also found myself engaging with characters that I never thought I would, more specifically Poppy herself. In Chapter 2, you could not pay me to care about this bitch. She was fine to forward the plot, and her dialogue was also fine, but she ultimately felt more like a prop than a character, and didn't feel distinct or unique in any way. But in Chapter 3, her plan, her desires, her relationship with Kissy, and also the player, all make her feel like an actual character, and she's someone I'm actually interested in following in the future chapters, which again, I never thought I would have said. I do also like Ollie. Yeah, he's pretty similar to Gregory from Five Nights at Freddy's, but unlike Gregory from Five Nights at Freddy's, I don't have a desire to see him get shot and killed. I'm actually pretty curious to see what they're going to do with this character. Is he so much like Gregory that he's a voice coming from the prototype? Is he another mascot monster? Maybe another smiling critter? Maybe one's actually still alive? I'm interested to find out. I also just appreciate the overall world building in this chapter. Chapter 3 more so than the others. Really brought the Poppy Playtime universe to life, and got me invested in it. The monologue and story of Elliot Ludwig, the explanations given to us from dialogue and notes, and even the environmental work is all so well done, and shapes the world of Poppy Playtime. Speaking of the environmental work, it wouldn't be fair to finish off this video without mentioning the incredible visual quality of this game. This game looks beautiful. The quality of the models and the texture work is so far beyond the previous chapters, and beyond the expectations of the indie horror scene. All of the environments are perfect, from the formerly child-friendly areas that have become decrepit, to the industrial factory-like areas that feel so dangerous. It's just amazing to me how every area in this game looks like it served its purpose at one point, but has fallen apart over time. It feels really realistic in that regard, even though this location makes no goddamn sense. Playcare is such an outlandish idea, and this world makes no goddamn sense, but it manages to make everything feel so real to me. Even though so much of this makes sense, nothing feels like it was hastily thrown together for the sake of making the game work. It feels properly thought out, and like it was actually lived in and worked at some point. Everything looks and feels fantastic, and I love it. The animation work is obviously fantastic as well, which we've come to expect from the franchise. Every character's movements are very fluid and feel very natural. Nothing in this game feels awkward or out of place. It is very consistent in its quality. And the game looks gorgeous, but it also sounds gorgeous. Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 has the largest OST of any chapter, and it really enhances the experience of the chapter. The dark atmospheric tracks in this game perfectly fit the darker tone, and it really wouldn't be the same without it. My personal favorite track from the OST has to be The Hour of Joy, which plays during the final tape in the game with the same name. It's composed by the GOAT, Zachary Preciado, who has also said this is their favorite piece of music of theirs. This track really highlights the devastating nature of The Hour of Joy, and brings out so many emotions as the tape plays. I love the soft and gentle notes alongside the distorted, staticky noises. It's such a beautiful piece. In conclusion, Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is more than I ever could have asked for. The sheer quality of this game, and how successful it was in everything it attempted to do, is bound to change the landscape of the indie horror genre. This game is so good, I said this earlier, but this game is so good that it could borderline undo the negative influence this franchise has been credited for in the past. This game is genuinely terrifying. It achieves a level of horror that mascot horror has pretty much never seen before. The more mature and serious approach to the scare factor paid off beautifully and made for such a thrilling experience. This game is extremely fun to play, with so much variety in its mechanics and so many exciting sequences and moments that are always enjoyable to re-experience. This game is stunning to look at and experience and feel out. The environmental work is amazing, the visual quality is outstanding, and on top of that, the music and sound design is consistently on that same level of quality. Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is basically perfect. The only complaints I could really give it is that it's occasionally a little directionless. I think there are a couple points where it's a little too unclear where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do, especially because of how dark the game is. It's definitely hard to navigate the area every now and then when you're not even entirely sure what your goal is. However, this is pretty insignificant as far as I'm concerned. I was able to finish the game without too many issues before it was even released to the public. I am so happy that Poppy Playtime is going in this direction. This chapter is such a major improvement, and it's one of the best horror games I have played. And with Bendy the Cage going in a similar direction, FNAF clearly being more creative with its upcoming releases, Shipwreck 64 coming out at the start of the year, Indigo Park and Finding Frankie both on the way, Mascot Horror looks like it might actually level up this year. We will still have the new Ban games and the games like it, but so many big games are coming out, and have already come out in the genre, that are genuine works of art. Anyway, Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is absolutely fantastic, and I'm so happy to be able to say that. I highly recommend you play it yourself because it's a brilliant horror experience, and it's just a blast to play. That's going to be all from me. I have been the baddest, and I'll see you guys next time.